Our next speaker today is Sharleen Keleher, a project officer from Birdie's Tree by the Queensland Centre for Perinatal and Infant Mental Health, and a PhD candidate at CQUniversity. Sharleen is currently working with the Queensland Centre for Perinatal and Infant Mental Health, revising the Birdie's Tree early childhood curriculum. Over to you, Sharleen.
Thanks so much, Owen. So my name's Sharleen Keleher. I'm going to be talking to you today about disaster resilience education, specifically looking at early childhood education and care, and the work that CQUIMH has been doing with Birdie's Tree. Next slide, please. I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands we are all meeting on, and acknowledge that I'm presenting from the lands of the Tarrabalang Bunda, Gurang and Gurang peoples. Next slide, please. To give you some context for what I'm going to be speaking about today, I would like to introduce you to Birdie's Tree and our friends, Birdie and Mr. Frog. So they're going to be joining me today, but I might just pop them off my hands. So Birdie's Tree was developed by the Queensland Centre for Perinatal and Infant Mental Health in response to an increase in young children and families presenting with mental health and wellbeing concerns post-disaster. And also from community consultation, recognising that there was a gap in the resources that were used to help young children understand and process the impacts of disasters. So Birdie's Tree sits within a stepped care model. I'm going to be talking about universal resources today. So these are things that are used universally across communities and within education settings. We do also have more targeted interventions for children and families who need additional support as well. So for those of you who are interested, I've included a link on this slide to an introduction to Birdie's Tree, which is a short, like 4 or 5 minute video. I think the link will be in the chat as well. Next slide, please. So Birdie's Tree has grown into a suite of resources and programs, which currently includes 11 storybooks. It will actually be 13 very, very soon. So these range from things like Birdie and the Flood, Birdie and the Fire, Birdie and the Very Hot Day, which is really useful coming into summer, Birdie and the Virus, which was written in response to COVID-19 at the beginning of last year. And hot off the press, like literally arrived in my mailbox yesterday, is Birdie and the Storm, which is really good timing considering the severe storms we've been experiencing in Queensland these past few weeks. Next slide, please. Now, to go a little bit broader than Birdie's Tree. So disaster resilience education has mainly been developed and implemented for older children and adolescents in primary and secondary schools. Whilst this is incredibly important and valuable, we recognise that there's also really strong evidence that our youngest children are particularly vulnerable to negative impacts of disasters. Alongside this, we recognise the importance of early experiences for children's development, well-being, and long-term outcomes. And it's incredibly important that we explore how DRE can be embedded into early childhood education and care to be supporting children early before they reach school age. So looking at how we can achieve this, I've been working with CQUIMH, CQUniversity, and a number of early learning organisations to find ways in which we can explore these tricky topics like disasters with really young children, and how DRE fits with supporting children's learning and development in alignment with the early years learning framework. Some of the principles we suggest are crucial to an early years DRE program are that the experiences within the program are primarily child-led, whether that be through being led by the children's interests or being informed by the children's responses to things that are happening in the world around them, and identifying what the children are communicating to you about their needs. The program should also take a play-based approach, as we know play is the natural medium through which children learn and process their experiences and emotions. DRE can bring up some really challenging or tricky topics such as scary sounds, fear, and sometimes talking about experiences that challenge our sense of safety. It's important not only in the early years, but I'd suggest across any level of DRE program that we create safe spaces for children and adults to learn about and explore these tricky topics. Alongside this, we recognise the importance of developing emotional literacy as a crucial skill that supports well-being and resilience. Learning to recognise and name emotions provides children and adults with a sense of agency and control, and contributes to developing coping strategies that can be implemented when faced with challenging experiences. One way in which educators and parents can engage with children to talk about disasters in age-appropriate ways is through conversational reading. Conversational reading is a two-way interaction between an adult and child, or between a group of children and adults with a group of children, through the experience of sharing a story. The Birdie books have been designed to be used as a conversational reading tool, but of course there are many other wonderful books that can be shared in this way too. I've included another link to a short video that we've really recently released about what conversational reading is and how you can use this strategy with the children you're working with. And finally, we suggest that DRE should not be viewed as a reactive process that occurs after a disaster or disruptive event, but should span across from preparedness through to response and recovery. Over the next few slides, I'll give a few examples of how early years DRE fits within each of these stages. So next slide, please, Greg. During the preparedness phase, there are many ways in which DRE can be situated within the curriculum and within everyday practice. Some examples of this are developing emotional literacy, helping young children learn words for big feelings, building the children's knowledge and vocabulary around weather, illness, and other challenging and disruptive events they may come across. Helping children understand about disasters. This may look like preparing, such as get ready for storm season, which is happening in Queensland at the moment, but also recognising that sometimes things do happen that disrupt our sense of normality and safety. And we can work together to survive and recover after these experiences. And looking at developing protective factors, such as building strong, responsive, and caring relationships, increasing knowledge around disaster risk reduction, identifying when children need additional support, and connecting families with that support as required. Next slide, please. If a disaster or other disruptive event occurs, the important things we consider are ensuring physical safety and also looking at returning after the event. Some examples of things to consider at this stage are helping adults know how to respond to the emotional needs of young children, recognizing that young children are seeing everything and experiencing everything that we're experiencing, but they may not have the developed understanding of what's happening, and they may need that additional support, that caring adult around them to help them understand what's happening and reassure them that they are safe and cared for. Also looking at supporting emotional regulation. How do we calm ourselves, and how do we regulate with the children when they are distressed? We're also looking at restoring a sense of safety and giving children a sense of mastery over the event, which can look something like choosing to read a book about a flood, but then being able to choose when to close that book or to do something else that's completely unrelated to that disaster. Next slide, please. And then when we're looking at recovery, both short and long term, we look to things that help both adults and children process their experiences of the event and its impacts, and moving forward with this as part of their story. At this point, relationships are always incredibly important as a protective factor, and also the awareness of self-care to help adults look after themselves so they are able to look after the children they're caring for. Next slide, please. Because I know we're short on time, so I'll just flick through these slides quickly. So on this slide, we've got some examples of how Birdie's tree has been used in the 0 to 2 year age group. So with babies and toddlers, we see a lot of focus on relationship building, sensory play, exploring environmental sounds through music and movement, and self-awareness and recognizing emotions. Next slide, please. When we are working with children 2 years and up, we move into a lot of exploring different weather events. What is weather? How do we interact with weather, and how does it impact on the world around us? Again, lots of sensory play, storytelling, exploring, expressing and naming emotions, and learning about helpers in our community, such as fire and emergency services, the SES, and many more. Next slide, please. Okay, thank you all so much for your time today. This final slide has our contact details and the Birdie's Tree website if you're interested in connecting with us. And I look forward to having a chat with people in the Q&A and in the breakout rooms.
Thank you so much, Sharleen. I am still waiting to get myself a Birdie and a Mr. Frog, so I'm hoping they're in the mail